pastoralism. Yeah, we want real books, John. Like 265,000 word books about a guy who goes on a walk in Ireland while his wife cheats on him. Not 575,000 words about why protecting the natural world is important.
Okay, I don't know what he means exactly by laughed out of his position. Like, I certainly don't think it's literally true that his job was ever in danger. A lot of you probably already know that Lord of the Rings got an initial rough reception from critics, but only some critics. A lot of other critics were pretty ride or die for it right off the bat. It wouldn't become a phenomenon for another decade or so, but it certainly wasn't this massive critical or commercial bomb either. It had wildly mixed reviews and solid sales, so I don't think it's fair to say that he was nearly laughed out of Oxford in any sense. Secondly, of the bad reviews it did get, none of them even remotely resemble Soderden's description. Critics thought Lord of the Rings was juvenile, they thought it was one-dimensional, they thought Tolkien's style of writing was bad, but I just can't find anyone slamming it for being environmentalist, or anti-war, or anti-industry, or that it was pastoral, except one Marxist critic who thought pastoralism was conservative British nationalist imagery. Not for being soft. There's nothing about Lord of the Rings being too soft or not manly enough. If anything, critics thought it was too manly. And I'm dead certain no one complained that it was about men learning to talk about their feelings, simply because that does not happen in the books. I read them. It doesn't happen. 12. The record box office for a recent Chinese blockbuster was obviously faked.
In fact, a lot of people who work in the industry are pretty convinced that China fudges their numbers all the time. Avengers Endgame had been the biggest opening weekend of all time at a domestic box office with $357 million in the US and Canada. A record most industry professionals were convinced wouldn't be broken for years. But then earlier this year, Detective Chinatown 3 opened in China to a reported opening weekend of $400 million. These numbers weren't released by any studio or production company, of course. They were announced by CGTN, China's global television network. Basically their English language propaganda channel. The news wasn't even announced on local Chinese news, only the English language variant, making it pretty clear that it was a dick-wagging move, allowing the Chinese film industry, and by proxy the Chinese government, to flex how well they were doing economically, while most of the rest of the world's cinemas still stood empty because of COVID-19. And since there's no way for Hollywood studios to confirm these numbers, they're just forced to take the Chinese government at its word.
The germ of truth here is that there are reports of Chinese theater chains jacking up ticket sales, including at least one case that was probably because of pressure from the government. But that was for a specific government propaganda film, not a blockbuster. The only person who suggested that this one movie's numbers are fake is film journalist, vlogger Grace Randolph, and she literally has a section of her Wikipedia dedicated to shit she's made up. Now, I watched her video. She doesn't have any evidence. She just thinks it's suspicious that a movie could do that well during COVID.
They doubled their last biggest opening, and that seems to me like a ridiculous jump. There's no way it would jump that high.
You know, she's all like, I'm just asking questions. It's nonsense. Everyone else agrees that this movie's high box office was thoroughly normal, because it was a highly anticipated sequel, had a holiday weekend, there were a lot of COVID travel restrictions, so no one had anywhere else to go, and also China has a lot of people in it. Also, when the government does put their thumb on the scale for a movie, rival studios tend to call it out and complain about it. No one did that here. And the idea that China only announced it in English and we have no way to verify it, as far as I can tell, the only source for that is Soderden himself. These numbers get reported on box office tracking sites that track every ticket as they're sold, and they get that information directly from the theater chains themselves, not the government or the state media. If there's any fraud happening, it has to come from the theaters. The government actually has to go out and buy tickets, or force the theater chain to ring up fake screenings. It's not just, the government or the media said it, so we have to take their word for it. That's not how it works. Also, why would they only announce it in English? That doesn't make any sense. 13. Disney cynically exploited Howard Ashman's death.
Disney did have one employee who was out, and who they couldn't convince to go back into the closet, though. Lyricist Howard Ashman. The man who created the award-winning soundtracks for The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. Reportedly, Disney executives were frustrated with Ashman being so publicly out, but his growing clout made it impossible to do anything about it. But sadly, in March of 1991, Ashman passed away from complications related to AIDS. Later that year, Beauty and the Beast would go on to become a box office sensation, and become the first animated movie to ever
my
be
eraser.
nominated for Best Picture. Its main competition for Best Picture was seen to be The Silence of the Lambs, which was being protested against by the LGBT community for its portrayal of psychopath Buffalo Bill. Disney saw an opening to win over the gay community and made a giant donation to the Aid for AIDS Foundation. The seemingly altruistic act was later confirmed to be nothing more than a PR stunt, as the money had come out of Beauty and the Beast's award campaign budget. Disney saw it as nothing more than a for-your consideration ad. When the Oscars rolled around, Disney lost Best Picture to Silence of the Lambs, and when Howard Ashman's partner Bill Locke took to the stage to accept the Oscar for Best Song on his late partner's behalf, Disney executives reportedly fumed.
Okay, the best source I could find about Disney's relationship with Howard Ashman was the book Disney War, and here's what it says. First, about Howard Ashman's open gayness being a problem for Disney, the book points in the opposite direction. It says that when Disney recruited Ashman, he asked them if his sexuality was going to be an issue, and he was assured that it would not be. And when he later revealed his AIDS diagnosis to Eisner and Katzenberg and animation head Peter Schneider, they were all very supportive. Second, this supposed donation to the Aid for AIDS Foundation, there's just nothing. I've looked and found no connection between Disney and this charity, or any other shocking revelations about their Oscar campaign. There's just no publicity for this supposed publicity stunt. Disney did make a charity album for the Pediatric AIDS Foundation in 1991, but it had no connection to the Oscars. They auctioned off some Beauty and the Beast art for the gay men's health crisis in 1992, but that would have been after the Oscars. The only connection I could find between Disney and Aid for AIDS was the Disney Gay Night event I mentioned previously. And again, that was not connected to the Disney Corporation. And as for them being upset about Ashman's partner accepting his Oscar, according to Disney War, Katzenberg arranged that personally. If any other executives felt differently about it, please tell me where you found this information, but I don't understand why they make pandering donations to gays and then not be okay with a gay man on stage. Are they pandering to gays or not? 14. Rocky Horror saved 20th Century Fox.
Cleopatra's budget was so inflated and audiences were so disinterested in spectacle that it nearly tanked 20th Century Fox. They were only saved by the Rocky Horror Picture Show. More camp. Look it up, it's true.
Okay, the movie he's thinking of is The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music saved Fox, not Rocky Horror, which came out 12 years later and bombed and slowly caught on over the next few years as a midnight movie, by which point Fox had also made Star Wars, so
what are you talking about,
from anything.
Jerium?
For what it's worth, I am trying to keep this list to the more fanciful lies, not the basic factual errors like this, because I don't want to seem like I'm nitpicking. But this was just like so wrong that I had to say something. Also, he said look it up, which it annoyed me. 15. Legend of Korra was moved to streaming because it was too gay for television.
Nickelodeon fought tooth and nail against the creative team of Legend of Korra, who wanted to present a queer woman of color, which were at the time 3 words that the network did not want to hear in a pitch. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, there was little effort made to code Korra as queer in the earlier seasons. Maybe it was even a studio note to force Korra into a number of love triangles with male characters and a continuing on-again, off-again relationship with a male supporting character. Eventually going so far as to push the final 2 seasons of the show onto their web-only platform because they knew Korra and Asami were going to hold hands in the final shot. And well, we can't have that on TV now, can we?
Okay, reportedly there was some resistance from Nickelodeon for a female protagonist in a quote-unquote boy show. But that resistance didn't have anything to do with Korra being of color. I mean, that'd be weird as a sequel to Airbender. Nor did it have anything to do with Korra being queer. The writers say they didn't even decide there was anything gay going on initially. It just kind of gradually grew that way over the course of season 3 and 4, and they didn't decide to make it official until they were already actually working on the finale. So, right at the end, well after it was moved to streaming in the middle of season 3. And it was moved to streaming because of low ratings. It didn't have anything to do with 2 girls holding hands in the final shot. Okay, and speaking of hand-holding, 16. I Want to Hold Your Hand was controversial because any kissing or touching was taboo lyrical content.
Well, how is 2 boys holding hands any more inherently sexual than a boy and a girl holding hands? Bear in mind, the Beatles owe their skyrocket to fame thanks to their song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. But at the time, this was essentially a scandal. My daughter holding hands out of wedlock. Rock music before this was about how pretty your girl was. Touching and kissing was considered to be absolutely unsuitable for even teenagers. Elvis was so racy because he made songs about dancing with girls. His gyrating pelvis had women fainting.
What? All right, he's making some kind of point here about the straights being weird about hand-holding, but, I mean, like, does this even need a rebuttal? No, hand-holding in general has never been controversial. I Want to Hold Your Hand wasn't controversial, and there were songs about kissing before 1963. Ask your grandparents. Or just know anything about the past? 17. Weird Dahmer fangirls are shipping him with his first victim.
And we get an extra layer of that with Dahmer's victims, since the vast majority of them were not white, but the vast majority of Dahmer's thirsters online are white. There's further license for disconnection. They get to look at them even less like people than if they were white gay men. It's telling that the person fans ship Dahmer with the most is Stephen Hicks, his first and whitest victim.
So he's making a point that the weird Jeffrey Dahmer fandom is not just creepy, but also homophobic and racist, since they're so disrespectful to Dahmer's victims, most of whom were gay men of color. I think that's a fair point. But then Summerlin backs it up by pointing out how these fans ship Dahmer with his only straight white victim, Stephen Hicks. I decided to go see this quote-unquote popular ship for myself, and I spent my morning searching through the dark corners of Twitter,
I'm
Reddit,
done.
TikTok, Facebook, AO3.